This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 109 of the Here's How podcast for the 27th of August 2020. I try to stay off the topic of Trump on this podcast, but what about all us Irish feeling so superior and better than those dumb Americans who vote for him? Are we any better? Is our media any better than the Punch and Judy show on the other side of the Atlantic?
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
Here's what we've got coming up for you in this podcast. And you can't defeat an irrational feeling with a rational argument, can you?
Well, I mean, that's true. But what we're having right now is an ideological discussion or a discussion about the different reasons for why people believe as they do. You're making that particular point. But on the flip side, I mean, it can be argued other people could argue that they have other reasons for objecting to the building of a border wall.
That's coming up shortly, but first I want to say thank you to all of my donors on Patreon, especially to Anne-Marie and to Ronan, who both signed up as patrons since the last podcast. Anne-Marie especially generously. I really appreciate everyone who does that, though. Patreon is basically a system that allows people to donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month, and that helps me to devote more time to research and finding interesting guests. If you think that you could do the same as Anne-Marie and Ronan and all the other donors, there's details on the website and at the end of the show. Two minds are better than one. That's a fairly obviously true saying in most cases, whether in a work environment or elsewhere. Most people will be familiar with a situation where people in a group contribute suggestions that together get a solution to a problem that was better than any one member of the group could have come up with on their own. But it's not always true. Sometimes a group of people make a worse decision than any individual in the group would have. There's scientific research on this. It was done, like a surprising amount of interesting research, by the CIA. They did research in the aftermath of the failed invasion of the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, when the Americans supported anti-Castro Cuban exiles in launching a military attack on their home country. The attack was a disaster. Over 100 of the attackers were killed, and almost all of the rest of the force of 1,500 men were captured. In retrospect, it seemed obvious to everyone that such a tiny force, even with American-supplied weapons and backup, could never stand a chance against a relatively well-defended country. And the hope that this ragtag bunch of former plantation owners, landlords, businessmen and trust fund kids could inspire the population to overthrow their government and install them in charge instead seemed insane. Yet, this plan, insane in retrospect, was signed off by many well-qualified committees and experienced military people in the CIA. How could so many smart people have made such a big mistake? In fact, that was the problem. Fair play to them, the CIA brought in psychologists to analyse why the mistake had been made and avoid similar ones in future. And the resulting research was clear. One problem was the number of people involved. The fact that there were so many of them, so many different committees, planning split across the Eisenhower and Kennedy presidency, and no individual thought that they were personally responsible. Each individual saw that lots of other smart people were agreeing with the plan, so if they had doubts, they kept them to themselves, with the effect that everyone in the room thought that they were the only person with a niggling doubt. None of those other smart guys have this doubt. I must be wrong, so I'll stay stum. And even if the whole thing goes wrong, it won't be me held responsible. It'll be those other smart guys. I've heard this research expanded on by some business leaders who talk about this effect being amplified when there's a lack of diversity in the room where a decision is being made. That kind of fits here. All those CIA decision makers most likely had the same type of background. They were guys that came from similar white middle-class families, were educated in military academies, and had similar career paths from the army into the CIA. So where one of them has a blind spot in decision making, there's a very high risk that most or all of the others in the room have the same blind spot. In this case, when former Cuban landlords who had been booted out by Castro told them that for sure their former tenants would welcome them back and give them back their plantations, these CIA guys were all the type of people who wanted to hear and believe that. And because they wanted to believe that, they did believe it. That's when two minds are dumber than one. And a whole room full of minds is even dumber still. So you'd think that the current trend towards diversity could have benefits that people haven't even thought about. More diverse perspectives can lead to better decision making. But the problem I see here is that what's important to better decision making is more diverse perspectives. That isn't always what happens. There's a particular type of comeback that is sneaking from the nastier corners of social media into politics. The Sinn Féin Senator Lynn Boylan gave a prime example of it in the Seanad recently.
Senator Ward is right that if this goes to the courts, it more than likely would be thrown out or would never make it to the courts. Of course you can say that. You're a middle-class white man. So you view the law completely different to somebody who is a traveller, to somebody who is uneducated, to somebody who's maybe a member of the Roma community.
Of course you would say that because of the type of person you are, so I don't need to engage with what you're saying. This is what's called an ad hominem, which is a fancy Latin way of saying playing the man, not the ball. It's when someone doesn't have the smarts to defeat their opponent in a debate, so they try to insult them instead and say that their argument can't be right because look at the idiot who's saying it. As exemplified by Senator Boylan, the most recent fashion for this type of weak-mindedness tries to hide behind supposedly being the valiant defender of some put-upon minority or other. But it's very noticeable that the people who use it are often themselves middle-class white people, not from the group that they claim to be defending. Since I use the groupthink example from the 1960s, here's another example. If you have a political point to make, then this is the way to persuade people.
Be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama with its vicious racists, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
If your argument relies on insulting your opponent, or saying that it's invalid because of who that person is, then you need to look at it again, because that's a weak argument.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you want your point of view heard, dial 076 603 5060 and leave a contribution for the show. The lines are open 24/7 and you can find tips on how to record a good contribution and other ways to contact the podcast at here'show.ie/call.
On a Skype line now, I have Larry Donnelly. He's a native of Boston, but he teaches law in UCG in Galway. He has published law articles in many journals internationally and in Ireland, as well as being a regular media commentator. And he's also worked as manager of the Public Interest Law Alliance, which encourages the use of law in the public interest and for the benefit of marginalised and disadvantaged people in Ireland. And Larry, I got onto you because you wrote an article on TheJournal.ie recently about how the media treats Donald Trump, both on the Fox News more sympathetic side, but particularly on the anti-side. What was your thesis in that?
Well, it's a pleasure to be on with you, William. First of all, I wrote the piece for the Journal, and I write regularly for the Journal, but I wrote this particular piece because, as I indicate in it, one of the habits I've fallen into in the COVID period is watching CNN late at night, and in particular, the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that has struck me repeatedly while watching it is the fact that the program is a nonstop torrent of, I suppose, criticism and attacks upon the Trump administration. The host, Wolf Blitzer, is transparently anti-Trump. His guests routinely lambaste the president on a nonstop basis. There's almost no pushback whatsoever in terms of what is said in response. And the only time I do hear any kind of critical or hard-hitting interview, it's when someone who's defending the Trump administration comes on to speak as a guest on the program.
Okay, pause with that, Larry. So my question on that is, so what?
So what is the fact is, when I watch a news program, I want to see news. I want to be informed. I'm an opponent of Donald Trump. I find the man appalling in many ways. But when I watch a news program, particularly one that purports to cover politics and current affairs in the United States, I don't want to see one side of an issue. I want to see both sides. And of course, there are those who say that, yes, we need to fact check him. We need to hold him accountable. Absolutely, 100% agree. I 100% agree with that. But on the flip side, the fact is that come hell or high water, 40% or more of the American people are going to vote for Donald Trump in November. I think any news program that does not represent their viewpoint, or at least give their perspective an airing or a chance to be heard, is failing the people tremendously, and all they are doing is reinforcing perceptions and prejudices on the left in this instance, which is what CNN does, or on the flip side, which was what Fox News does by repeatedly trying to curry favor with the Trump administration and essentially being lackeys for the administration. What they do on the right, the American people, I think, are being badly let down by cable news networks.
Okay, hold with that, because I had someone from RTE on this podcast several years ago. They don't come on anymore for some reason. I can't imagine why. But I was quite shocked actually by, an editor in Morning Ireland saying that they were criticised by both sides and therefore felt that they got balance right. And, one of the first things that you would learn about in a journalism class is false balance. So if you have someone from NASA on that says that the world is round, and someone from the Flat Earth Society who on and says that the world is flat, you can't just say, well, there are 2 points of view there and you choose your own. That's just objectively wrong, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That's true, and there's fact and there is fiction. But let's look at an example. And again, this is an issue of strict ideology. Whether you like it or not, and I don't like it, right? There are people in the United States who very strongly agree with and believe that Donald Trump should continue to build a wall along the southern border with Mexico. They should be given in terms to have a balanced hearing on that issue. Those who believe that should be built should also be heard from, not just those who lampoon and ridicule the idea and say it's racist and everything else. The fact is, those who agree with the president should also be given an airing, and then the people at home, those who watch, will be fully served by the news network and can make up their own minds as to whether it's a good idea or not a good idea. I'm not talking about facts here. I'm talking about a balance of ideological perspectives about the president and about conservatism generally in the United States.
So, first of all, I agree with you on that point. I think you're correct that people who believe something different, who have, a different idea, should be allowed to express that. And if you've got an organization like CNN, which I think styles itself as being more politically neutral than Fox News, then that's true. But they hit a limit on that, because if somebody says that we need a wall on the southern border because Jewish people have paid these dirty brown people to create a caravan where thousands of people are planning to invade across the border, that's just objectively wrong. And you can't debate with that type of an opinion, which is essentially the reasoning that those people give. It becomes very difficult when you are not debating the merits of a solution, but you're debating the facts which drive those merits.
Oh, okay. I mean, you're again. One of the things I say in the piece in the Journal is that we have to allow all ideas on the table within the bounds of reason. And I think one of the things that's essential to good journalism is discernment. And I think anyone who lacks the discernment to allow somebody spouting some sort of conspiracy theory like that with respect to the building of the wall shouldn't be in journalism. That person shouldn't be heard
But
from.
hold on for a second, Larry. The notion that George Soros was paying some unknown thousands of people to stream across the US border from Mexico is central to that. And that is, as you say, 40% or more of people are likely to vote for Trump in November. That belief is central to their belief system.
I would fundamentally disagree with that assertion. Absolutely 100% disagree with that assertion, because as somebody who has a lot of friends who are Donald Trump supporters, they would laugh at the idea that George Soros is behind this. They would have other reasons for why they think that a border wall should be built. And these are the kind of perspectives we need to hear. I can give you one.
Sure.
There was an African-American conservative Trump supporter who was on the Sviati States of Mind podcast very recently.
Mm-hmm.
He was asked about the wall and why he believes so strongly that the wall should be built. And his argument was as follows: that the reality is that the people who come over the wall, who come into the United States illegally from the southern border, tend to flock to the inner cities and work in jobs in the service industry and elsewhere. And that they, because of their status, they are able to undercut the wages of typically African Americans who
Mm-hmm.
have worked historically in those service industry jobs, and that there need to be controls put on immigration, up to and including the building of the wall, to allow for African Americans who live in those areas to take those jobs and to take them at reasonable wages and not be undercut by those who are coming from the southern border. That's a reasonable perspective in terms of the wall that I think needs to be heard, whether you agree or disagree with it.
I agree with you. I think that's entirely correct. But the answer to that is that, number one, the Mexicans who are people from other countries also in South America and Central America, who are coming, typically land in the United States in an aeroplane. It's very unusual for them to go through that process of crossing the desert, and that might be interrupted by a wall. And number two, the business communities, and this was documented by Eric Schlosser with the strawberry field. I can't remember the exact name of the essay. I'll put it in the show notes. That business interests were being very careful to keep it a very specific degree of illegal for people to come across into the United States, so that they would still be able to come, but that they wouldn't be able to enforce any labor rights, because they would be still technically illegal, even though they would be partly tolerated. That's a rational answer to that. And my feeling is that the Trump supporters are not expressing a rational argument, and they are expressing a feeling, and a wall is a symbolic thing that it doesn't really matter if it exists physically. And you can't defeat an irrational feeling with a rational argument, can you?
Well, I mean, that's true. But what we're having right now is an ideological discussion, or a discussion about the different reasons for why people believe as they do. You're making that particular point. But on the flip side, I mean, it can be argued other people could argue that they have other reasons for objecting to the building of a border wall.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, that the school systems in areas around the border are all of a sudden overwhelmed and huge demands are being put upon them, and the people who are there's education is being diminished and their experiences are being diminished because of what's happening, that they're losing out unfairly because of what's happening. There are a whole lot of reasons. I'm not particularly moved by them. I'm opposed to the wall again, but I think that the idea is these news programs should be forums for discussion and debate, and then let the people make up their minds based on what they've heard. And when there is misuse of facts or there's outright lies, absolutely, that's where the host comes in and jumps on it, whether it's somebody on the right or somebody on the left. That's what should happen. But we need to hear different perspectives. And the idea that we only hear one side, whether it's on the right or whether it's on the left, is deeply disturbing to me.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. And you mentioned Keith Olbermann and Rachel Maddow. Some people who have cable or satellite TV in Ireland might be familiar with those. I can see them on YouTube. Other people might not. But they're essentially MSNBC presenters, and they make absolutely no effort to be independent or to be impartial in their opposition to Trump. But I just want to look at something else. How far would Donald Trump have to go in order for any ethical journalist to say, my job has to be to persuade people to boot him out?
Well, let's say, for instance, if he started some sort of daft war, or if he, for instance, undertook some mass program of incarceration.
Larry, for example, what if he organized irregular armed forces to snatch peaceful protesters off the streets completely illegally and detain them illegally?
Well, again, there are two sides to that point. I think if that were the case, yes, then I think that would be grounds for objective journalists to attack the president. However, lots of people on the ground in areas where I suppose unnamed troops are being deployed would say that there is actual violence going on in the streets, that there has been looting going on in the streets, that this is actually a proportionate response. What I think the job of journalism.
Hold on, Larry, no, just on the specific constitutionality part of it, where people are being seized, where there's no clear power of arrest, where what seem like paramilitary or militias who seem to be prison workers or other federal employees who are typically armed, but are unidentified, who refuse to identify themselves, who have no identifying markings. That's very difficult to excuse in a constitutional system, isn't it?
No, and again, I have deep discomfort with it. But the constitutionality or unconstitutionality is not entirely clear. There are views on both sides of that issue, and it's a gray area that the president is operating in. So yeah, I think that there are definitely problems. And again, ideologically, I agree with you 100%. But what I'm saying is that that on the ground, what I think the job of journalism to do is to say, is it in fact peaceful, nonviolent protest, or is there a dirtier underbelly to all of it? And I think my problem again with the media is they're all too willing, because it's Donald Trump, they're all too willing to accept the fact that they're all peaceful, nonviolent, because it is Donald Trump who is acting here. And that's my problem.
Okay, one thing that Donald Trump is regularly lambasted for is after the Charlottesville neo-Nazi rally in which one young woman was murdered and had a procession of, mostly it seemed, young men screaming about Jews will not take over, and including flying swastika flags. Donald Trump, in the aftermath of that, said that there are fine people on both sides. Isn't there a point where you can just have to say there aren't fine people on at least one side?
Sure. I think I believe that, yes, his comment was an appalling one. And I think that most journalists, including journalists who would be identified as being on the right, saw no merit in the comments that he made. I don't think anybody sought to defend what he said. And I think he was rightly held accountable for it. I think it was, again, another appalling instance in which he revealed that he doesn't have the character to be president of the United States.
Okay, but I'm talking more about how journalists should react. And there exists a spectrum, and some people will try to say Trump is Hitler, and that's clearly wrong. But Trump exists on a spectrum, and somewhere else on that spectrum is perhaps Lukashenko in Belarus or Putin in Russia, and somewhere further down that spectrum are other more dictatorial leaders, perhaps in Korea, and somewhere at the end of that spectrum is Hitler. And the bottom line is that it's not clear how far down that spectrum Trump has to go to just lose all right to be treated as a normal politician. Would you accept that model?
I would accept that model if it reaches a particular state. I mean, I'm one who doesn't or who isn't inclined to believe that Trump is going to go so far, or that Trump is, a fascist, which is an overused word.
Yes.
I'm not one who tends to believe that Trump will refuse to accept the result of the election. I think he might try some tactics, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere, because I think he knows that the institutions of the United States, up to and including the United States military, will ensure that he does not. So I think some of that criticism of the president is overwrought.
I agree with that. I think he's not at the end of that spectrum. But focus on my question. How far down that spectrum does he have to go before people say that's it? He doesn't get the respect or the privileges of a normal politician.
It's a fair question. I mean, how far does he have to go? I don't know. I think ultimately, for journalists to decide. I mean, I've given you a few examples. If there were, mass incarceration of people because of they belong to a particular race, if he started some sort of daft war that had no basis in reality, I think that would be it. Or I think if he didn't accept the result of the presidential election in November, I think those would be the kinds of things that would tip the balance. I think he probably teeters close to the edge on that front, but to my mind, he hasn't crossed it.
Okay, I want to expand that thought, because the problem with that model that you're giving there is that by the time he crosses that line that you're describing, it's too late.
I frankly, I don't believe so. I mean, if he does, announce or start something, it can be rolled back relatively quickly for a whole variety of reasons. Again, this is my faith in the institutions of the United States, and I don't believe he would go that far. It's just my opinion that he wouldn't go that far, and that if he did, then I think that's the time that he deserves to be rightly and roundly condemned. But I do think that the media has done a good job of holding the guy to account. I mean, that's the reality. And again, I just think that some of this stuff is overwrought. I think some of the stuff, we spend an awful lot of time discussing all of this. We've spent very little time discussing the issues in the United States. And that's where one of the things I think journalism should be trying to do is trying to get back and focus in on the issues rather than on the persona of Donald Trump and on his behavior. I know that the latter two make for good ratings, but issues, tackling the problems the United States has, that's what's going to improve things. And if they want to highlight President Trump's deficiencies on that front, I'm all in. But let's get to that.
Okay, I tend to agree with you on that, and I think that focusing on his hair or his vanity or whatever is unhelpful. But how, to move this on to Ireland, how would you rate Irish journalism compared to that international context?
I think if you compare it to the United States in particular, I think that, almost to say there is no comparison. I think journalism here does a reasonably good job of providing balanced cover to politics and current affairs. I do think that we see both sides and both perspectives on just about every issue that there is. As I say in the piece, there are some fault to be found. I think people on the left have an issue. People on the right sometimes have an issue. Nowhere is perfect, but by way of comparison, I think Ireland does a much, much better job. And it's down to the model of journalism here, whereas I suppose in the United States, it's driven by ratings and advertising revenue. It's quite a different model here, and I think that model is far superior.
I think you're right. I think Irish journalism does well in some respects. Where I would have criticism of them, and you can tell me whether you agree or not, is there's a concept called the Overton window, which essentially means that there is an accepted area of discussion. So not everybody has to agree with the same viewpoint in order to get airtime, in order to get on TV, in order to get quoted in a newspaper. But that window is relatively narrow. And there are people who have opinions outside that who are just considered outre and not acceptable in terms of journalism. And one good example of that is you will never hear a politician, pretty much of any party, who will make even the mildest of criticism of the Gardaí without prefacing it by giving a fairly long lecture about how hard the job of the Gardaí is and how brave they are and so forth. That is a failing of Irish journalism, isn't it?
Maybe, but I mean, I think if you're talking about people who are critical of the Gardaí or people who are coming from that kind of hard left perspective, I mean,
Not necessarily hard left.
Well, I mean, if you want to see people who are critical of the Gardaí, for instance, Paul Murphy, I think gets a pretty good airing on media outlets at every opportunity I can see, and he certainly has had his own brushes with the Gardaí in different instances and in security personnel. So I'm not so sure if that stands up. I think that a lot of people, for instance, on the left and some on the right, would say that that fringe perspectives arguably get too much of a run out in Irish journalism. I mean, a lot of people on the left would say that in order to ensure balance, these kind of right-wing fringe dwellers get trotted out on different issues that might be out there. So I do think that there are a reasonably wide range of perspectives that are there. Where I think you have a point is I think that in terms of the so-called establishment, there is probably a prevalent view there on a number of issues, some of which I suppose tacks to the right, some of which probably tacks to the left. And I think everything is viewed through that prism. That would be my one sort of failing, that there is this kind of idea of we're the sensible ones and that's how it goes. I think that would be my one perhaps particular issue with Irish media coverage.
Okay, one striking contrast that I saw was that one cabinet minister, for a single instance of penalty points fraud, somebody went, Chris Hoon, the former Liberal Democrat deputy leader, went from being a cabinet member to serving a jail sentence for a single instance of penalty points fraud, where he essentially got his wife to say that she was driving the car when the car was speeding. We've had penalty points fraud operated on an industrial scale by very senior Gardaí. The circumstances would suggest that they were doing it for profit. And that's just waved aside. We do have some areas of discussion that are just not allowed in Ireland. That is true, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think that there have been, and there's well documented, records of cover up, et cetera, within the Gardaí. What I would hope for is that, some of the things that, for instance, the Commission on the Future of Policing and other bodies have recommended would militate against that. In terms of the case of the Liberal Democrat MP in the UK, I think probably there that the punishment was a little bit disproportionate in my view. But again, I think that what's happened here is probably too far on the other side.
Well, you can make that judgment about Chris Huhne, but we had, for example, a serving TD in Ireland who was very clearly committing fraud when she made a fraudulent claims, or let's say inaccurate and untruthful claims about how badly injured she may have been when she fell off a swing in a hotel whilst having taken a few drinks. And that's one thing, you'll always get people who'll try on a claim, and some of those will be politicians. But what I was really struck by was an Irish Times politician giving a very long homily about how terrible it was that she lost her job as the chairperson of a Dáil committee because the public opprobrium was sufficient punishment for her. Arguably, she committed a crime there. That's really startling that you have a journalist defending a politician in that situation, isn't it?
Well, I think that, journalists and all of us have our own opinions on particular circumstances of cases. And in terms of the court case that was filed, I don't know enough about the specifics to comment. I didn't see, as a lawyer, I wouldn't comment unless I saw the pleadings and the evidence and et cetera as to whether it was a fraudulent claim or not. So, yeah, of course, some journalists are going to be sympathetic to the circumstances and plight of others. And, perhaps there is something to the criticisms of the establishment and its mining of its own collective back. Perhaps there is something to that. But I think if you look at the bigger picture in terms of corruption, in terms of bias, etc., I think Ireland holds up very well in that case.
Actually, I agree with you. For all of my criticism, I think we are not the worst in the world. Larry Donnelly, law lecturer in University College Galway, dual citizen, I understand, with Ireland and the United States. Will you be exercising your vote in November?
Yeah, absolutely. I voted already in the Massachusetts Democratic primary, and I'll be voting again before November's election.
Larry, I don't think we need to ask you who you're going to vote for. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.
Never miss a show. Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
Go to the website for sources and references from the show, and while you're there you can like the show on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and follow Larry Donnelly at Larry P. Donnelly, and get in touch with me if you can suggest a guest or a topic for a future show. And thanks again to Anne-Marie and to Ronan and all the other patrons on Patreon. Their donations allow me to devote more time to research and finding interesting guests. And if you could do the same as them and donate $1 or $2 per podcast or per month, please go to patreon.com/here'show. That link is on the website. Also there you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone or by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The next show will be uploaded next Thursday, the 3rd of September. I'll be talking to the loyalist and Gaeilgeoir, Linda Irvine. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we have